The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
Okay, so it's that in-between time, like between Halloween and Thanksgiving, and that's always a weird time of year for me. It's like, what do I do for these couple of weeks? And work and family time is not, like, there's not a lot going on. So I thought, like, what I would do today is there's a piece of true crime news I want to talk about because we've talked about this several times already. And then there's this series of serial killers, if that makes sense. Like, it's multiple serial killers. And I thought we would start that. Like, we would talk about it. I could give a really good overview of most of it in a couple of episodes. But, like, the truth is, it's a lot of still partly unsolved things. But to start off today, I thought we would talk again about Juliana Perez Nogales. Did you see this news that came out? It was around Halloween, I think, that it popped up.
You mean like the progress?
Yeah. So this is the au pair that was in the double homicide in Virginia, up in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Right, and that happened in February. The crime happened February 24th, 2023.
Correct, yeah. A woman named Christine Banfield was stabbed to death. She's 37-year-old. She's married to a guy named Brendan Banfield. And then there was this 39-year-old guy, Joseph Ryan. He was shot to death and then had the weird 911 call. We talked about this in, I think, All the Staging in the World, maybe.
Yes, that's the one.
There's another episode where we followed up on it because they did finally charge the husband. This is interesting. So the 24-year-old au pair, Juliana, she has now pled guilty. You can pull this up from multiple sources, but People magazine summarized it kind of this way. A Brazilian au pair who was charged in connection with the deaths of her ex-lover's wife and another man has pleaded guilty to manslaughter to one of the slayings. The plea deal is between Fairfax County, Virginia prosecutors and the attorneys for Juliana Perez Nogales. It's the latest development in the bizarre double homicide case. So Steve Descano is Fairfax County's Commonwealth's attorney. He's the district attorney there, basically. He said that this plea agreement, which was made on Tuesday, October 29th, in the shooting of 39-year-old Joseph Ryan, he believes it marks a significant step forward in the case, and it's an important development in the pursuit of justice for the victims and their families. Now, in September, Brendan Banfield, who is Christine Banfield's wife, but was also Juliana's lover or ex-lover, he was indicted by a Fairfax County grand jury on 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. And this is related to the deaths of Joseph Ryan and Christine. I'm not going to go back into all of the details of the crime itself, but here's what they're saying. And this is according to a guy named Eric Klingon. He is the deputy Commonwealth's attorney. So he is second in command in Fairfax County. At the plea hearing, he said that Brendan had expressed a desire to be rid of his wife. We've heard that this might actually be coming from multiple affair partners, including Juliana. The month before the murders, Brendan allegedly creates a profile on this alternative lifestyle website called fetlife.com, Fetlife, and he starts communicating with Joseph Ryan, who is a mixed martial arts enthusiast who liked live action role playing. A lot of words there. Then he basically directs Juliana, the au pair, to start talking on the phone through a messaging application called Telegram so the two of them are talking. So Juliana is talking to Joseph Ryan, and this is like a way for him to confirm the plan, which is that these two are going to meet up. And according to Klingon, Brendan Banfield then lures Joseph Ryan to the home February 24th, 2023. And the allegations that they make are that Joseph Ryan likely believed he was meeting Christine Banfield to have a consensual sexual encounter that involved restraints being used on her and having her clothing being cut off with a knife that he brought and other violent or pseudo-violent sexual role play. Banfield, the husband, had allegedly given Juliana a gun that he bought a month earlier, and he told her that she needed to call Christine's phone when Joseph Ryan enters the home, and then to call Brendan's phone saying there was a strange man at the house and that she was scared. So the call to Christine's phone went straight to voicemail because Brendan had turned her phone off and put it in a kitchen drawer when he was leaving home that morning. Brendan then gets Juliana's call while he's at a nearby McDonald's waiting so that he can return quickly and be the hero. And the prosecutors allege that he drives home, he shoots Ryan in the head, and stabs his wife. Juliana saw Joseph Ryan moving, and she shot him. This is played out in the 911 call. The duo then reports the offense as if Joseph Ryan, who they've invited here, albeit in the guise of Christine Banfield, they report him as an intruder, and they say that he stabbed Christine Banfield. So they go through this process of investigating this case. They've served warrants on the Banfield home in 2023, but months after the crime in October. And investigators find photos of Brendan and Juliana in, quote, romantic and loving poses. And they notice in the bedroom that the au pair's underwear, it's like she's moved into the master bedroom. They charged her first with second-degree murder and use of a firearm. She's not been charged related to Christine's death. So keep that in mind. She's been in custody for 2 years, and she has now given, according to prosecutors, a detailed account of the killings that corroborated the evidence that was discovered during the course of the investigation. So she's facing up to 10 years in prison for these charges, but she's going to be recommended to be released from custody with credit for time served as long as she continues to cooperate with authorities at the end of Brendan Banfield's trial. Her sentencing is currently scheduled for March 21st, 2025. Brendan Banfield is scheduled to go on trial February 3rd. I just found this update to be really interesting.
Right. So I think that recently we talked about the weird sort of, I don't want to say trend, but like on occasion, someone will kill somebody and there'll be this like brief moment where they're like, oh, a bear attacked, right?
Right.
And so in this situation, I'm not sure. I don't know if the gravity of this really hits everybody, but a man went online and catfished, pretending to be his wife, another man. And the prerogative of this whole endeavor was to set this stranger up to be the intruder that killed his wife after he murdered his wife and then murders him.
I don't know that people can possibly grasp how complex and terrible a plan that is.
Don't you think that Brendan Banfield thought that he had come somehow, he had come up with the perfect murders?
I guess he does think that. I mean, so one of the interesting things about this is Brendan Banfield is a law enforcement officer. Obviously not a very good one, but
I think he worked for the IRS.
right, but he's got a gun.
Right.
Badge,
Yeah, you're
nine
right.
yards.
It is law enforcement, but I'm not sure how much violent crime investigation he had done.
Well, it's an interesting crime, and if they had got away with it, I would probably be even more interested in like knowing how they did it. But I guess I'd never know about it. It's that kind of thing.
I was going to say, yeah, if they had gotten away with it, we wouldn't know about it. But also, if they got away with this, the investigators wouldn't have been doing their jobs, right? Digital evidence now is, I'm not saying that it's never like misinterpreted or wrong, but from a point in time where we had experts interpreting what the data meant, and it was somewhat confusing in the judicial setting in court. Basically, juries were relying on what they were being told by experts, and like nobody could really tell the difference because it was confusing, right? We've kind of, I think, surmounted. We've gotten past that sort of hurdle, and they can tell a lot of stuff. And it's presented in ways that juries can see with their own eyes, right?
Right.
With regard to, for one thing, people's location, or at least the location of their phone, right? And that is, to me, one of the craziest things, because not only have prosecutors and law enforcement started using it in crimes that happen, they are somehow mining the archives of previous crimes from long ago to get newfound information, it seems, right?
Yes.
And I find that fascinating because it was there all along. We just didn't know what to do with it. So I think that all the effort that went into this, and now we've got Juliana taking a plea deal and confessing, right? Confessing not only her own role, but also Brendan Banfield's role, which he initially wasn't charged. It took a while, right? And then it was sort of our position that, it seems really unlikely that this nanny our au pair took it upon herself to kill this woman, right? And it's more than likely going to involve the husband. And of course it did. But it fell apart so quickly. So for all of that, they get absolutely nothing. He murdered his daughter's mother and a man who had nothing to do with anything.
Yep.
That is some cold-hearted action.
It is, and it's so interestingly planned. You don't get much more premeditation than luring someone you plan on making your, quote, killer, intruder. I mean, the husband is even setting himself up to be the hero in this situation. How wild is that?
It's crazy.
You did call it, though. You said you thought the au pair would fold.
Well, right, because it wasn't like love. He saw an opportunity, and I cannot stand people like this. I can't stand people that think that instead of getting divorced, they should kill their child's other parent.
Yeah.
That is absolutely insane. And if that crosses your mind, you need to get help, because I just can't even fathom that situation. But to me, it demonstrates, for one, what the victim went through, right?
Yes.
What Christine Banfield was going through when she was alive, the receiving end of this, right? And so it makes it all the more sad, because you know that, like, wow, this guy he's got a deviant mind, right?
Definitely.
And if he had taken all that energy and effort and focused on like trying to I don't know, fix his marriage, fix his life, not have these types of thoughts. Because I assume he thought it would be better for her to be dead so he didn't have to deal with it. And I guess financially speaking, it would work out better for him. It never works out.
No, whatever his plan was here, it backfired, and it's gonna cost him life in prison ultimately, more than likely. I don't imagine this is a situation where they're overstating the evidence at this point, because they've moved pretty slowly with this trial. If he goes on trial when planned, it'll be 2 years from the time of the murder. They've clearly had, at least from what I could tell, a year and change of active investigation. I noticed that they were still pulling jail calls right before they indicted him. And the jail calls at the time were between Brendan Banfield and Juliana. And she started to feel the pressure of the situation. Basically, she felt like they were, quote, a couple, only because he didn't want her to essentially turn on him. And
he 100% used her, though.
He did. Yes. And it's a terrible setup. It's one of those things where if you present it as like some kind of story that you want to put on TV in a fictional form, it seems too on the nose and too strange. But
you would have people saying it's not going to work.
Right, yeah.
That doesn't work. It's not real. But this guy managed to pull it off, and now he will spend the rest of his life in prison for not getting away with a terrible, terrible crime.
I mean, he may plead out to this. I mean,
he'll still spend the rest of his life. I mean, because there's two people that's the other thing. So Joseph Ryan is also a victim. He had nothing to do with any of this, and he never knew what hit him.
Yep. Yeah,
I think that's really
horrible.
bad.
Yeah. It's hard to express how terrible these two senseless deaths are for Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan, for the families that are left behind. It's absolutely horrible. And obviously they have an au pair, which means they have a child. And that alone, to me, it falls back to what you were saying. Like, how do you do this instead of just getting a divorce? And I don't have a lot more on this right now, but I'm excited to see this go to trial and Brendan Banfield to get what's coming to him. Excited's probably like a wrong word to use in the circumstances, but like this guy, I think he legitimately thought he was going to get away with this.
Well, and honestly, for a while there, it was looking. I was disappointed in the fact that he hadn't been charged. It took them a long time, I felt like, to charge him, but I guess they were just, making sure that the ends justify the means and getting everything they needed in the meantime, which is fine. They're the investigators, but I was just thinking to myself how ridiculous it would be for her to end up getting stuck with all of the culpability. Yeah. Because in a horrifying situation where he wasn't brought to justice, like people like him that hatch these awful plans, they don't change, right?
No, they do not. We have a new case. Do you have anything more on the Banfield murders right now?
Nope, not right now.
We have a new case that we're going to cover in a couple of episodes. This is one that's always fascinated me. Depending on where you read and what you read about this, there are lots of news articles on it. I think last count, there were 8 serial killers involved in this story. I thought we would start today just kind of setting it up, because the victims in this case have had their own interesting stories along the way. And sometimes they've made their way into our true crime news, but we've never just looked at how it's gone down from the perspective of like this whole situation. And the truth is, like, this is one of those things where you and I look at it and we go, why are they lumping all this together? And then afterwards, when they start to split it back out, it makes a little more sense, but it's also still really terrible.
So I think that the lump together, I think that it has like a couple of good attributes, even though ultimately it doesn't help as much. But I do think it helps to sort of, create sort of a mass attention, right?
Yeah, you're right. Like it's sort of like it's such a spectacle that like a lot of people end up reading about it. that maybe wouldn't normally read about an individual case involved in it, but they read about the whole thing and maybe see something they recognize in there.
Right. And this group of cases is very circular in that, I don't know that it's widely known as like the given name, but it does make its way all the way through. Like you're saying, they're lumped together and then they slowly get torn back apart or individualized again, right?
Yes. Our sources for this largely come from the Casper Star Tribune from a very long time ago. The Salt Lake Tribune plays in here. We use newspapers.com for a lot of this. The Billings Gazette plays in. The Deseret News comes in here. I found myself reading the Pantograph, which I had never read before, the Daily Herald out of Nevada, the Times News, several different AP articles related to kind of the individual cases. Think that's the bulk of it. There's some art that's been done based on these in the last couple of years. Wyoming Public Radio, I pulled previous sources that we had used. There's a very interesting article from the early 90s from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that plays in here. But kind of generally speaking, you can go and there's now a well-curated wiki on this. Some of this information is found there pretty readily. Most of it comes from the sources that I just mentioned. This is a series of murders that has a core 9 victims. And they put that plus symbol on there when you read about it online. But the truth is, it's a bunch of different killers that at first it looks like it's the work of like 1 or 2 people. This happens for the purposes of the story that we're telling in Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Idaho. And it takes place from 1983 to 1997. What we're going to be talking about for the next couple of episodes and the victims that we're talking about today, collectively, this is known as the Great Basin Murders. Now, the Great Basin Murders, there's a Great Basin killer and a Great Basin murderer. That's just what happens when the press talks about it. Realistically, this is an offshoot of a much bigger project where these task force have gotten together and looked at freeway or interstate killers. Several of those people end up playing into this story. But the Great Basin Murders, it's called the Great Basin Murders because of the geographical area. And most of these victims were dumped near interstate highways that run across the Great Basin. The Great Basin is the largest area of contiguous watersheds that basically have no outlets to the ocean in North America. I think the word for that is endorheic. So it's a drainage basement that would retain water and there would be no outflow to other bodies of water. Now, it spans most of Nevada, a lot of Utah, and then pieces of California, Idaho, Oregon, Wyoming, and Baja California. It is noted for being a very dry or arid climate, and it has some of the most interesting topography in the United States. Basically has a low point at Badwater Basin in Death Valley, and the highest point is the summit of Mount Whitney. It's a very interesting area to read about. It just happens to be in the context of something really terrible here. Now, most of these victims that are assaulted were either teenage or adult females. It's believed that they were sexually assaulted and then murdered by strangulation, stabbing, or shooting. And then they would be abandoned either on hilltops near interstates or in deserted like expanses of land that basically miles from nowhere is the idea that comes to mind. But also some of the bodies are found in snowdrifts or in or near rivers. Some of the bodies were thought to have been post-mortem. This initially leads to speculation that all of these killings are the work of a single serial killer. And the press nicknames that single serial killer the Great Basin Killer. I have found references to that as early as 1988 and in mainstream press as early as 1992. That idea, over time, has been abandoned. The reason it's been abandoned, with the passage of time, hindsight being 2020, it's been established by both local, state, and federal authorities that there were multiple unrelated serial killers operating in the area known as the Great Basin. And as that area grew, we were able to see that a majority of these killings, with the onset of DNA evidence, are committed by different perpetrators. So some of these murders that we're going to talk about are solved, and some of them aren't. But the place that we're going to start is with the initial victims. So these are the 9 that are considered to be the, quote, Great Basin murders. According to investigators, on February 17th, 1983, a 23-year-old woman named Janelle Johnson was hitchhiking from Denver, Colorado to Riverton, Wyoming. She was last seen at a truck stop in Sinclair, Wyoming at approximately 9 o'clock p.m. On March 1st of 1983, so about 2 weeks later, she was found raped and murdered in Fremont County, Wyoming. After murdering her, her killer buried her body in a very shallow grave, but he picked a bad location, and runoff water from storm drains pretty quickly eroded part of the gravesite. When examining her body, the authorities were able to determine that there was seminal fluid that they believed belonged to the perpetrator. There was also bite marks on one of her shoulders, and they made an impression of that at the time. Even though we have this, the killer is unfortunately still unidentified. Samples of her killer's bodily fluids became unusable for testing after the refrigerator where they were being stored broke down. Now, I found on Reddit a really cool write-up. The user's name is Tara Calico's Bike, and they pulled together most of the information that I just mentioned and a little bit more. According to their write-up, they said that on February 16th of 1983, which was Janelle's 23rd birthday, she left Riverton around 5 or 6 p.m., and she was making her way back to Denver in order to interview at the Vinoy Talent Center. She was looking to get a modeling job. So she had made a phone call to her roommate on the 17th, and this was to inform them that she had made it to Colorado. She had successfully completed her interview, and she leaves the Denver area around 5:30 p.m., makes her way back to Riverton. So in terms of driving, that's about a 5-hour ride. In theory, Janelle should have arrived home safely around 10:30 p.m. 9 p.m. when she's at the Sinclair, Wyoming truck stop. That's the last time she's seen, and she never makes it home. 5 days pass before anyone has any sign or word from Janelle. Family and friends are worried about her. So on the 22nd of February, a missing persons report ends up being filed with the Riverton, Wisconsin Police Department. On March 1st, her body is discovered off of Muscat Creek Road. This is in an area known as Shoshone. She had been buried, but they had quite a bit of weather that was contributing to the storm drains basically overflowing, and it eroded part of the grave away so her body could be seen. There was an autopsy that was done there. We already talked about that a little bit. They don't have an effective way to use the DNA, and I assume once that refrigerator breaks down, they probably got rid of it. What did you think about this one?
I think that there's some good possible culprits. I don't know exactly who I would say, but so we've got, a young pretty girl who's hitchhiking, and she disappears after she's known to be one place and she is headed back to another place, right?
Yeah, in transit.
So clearly she had been picked up, right? I found some information. I was trying to see what this stands for. I'm not exactly sure. It's the National Organization of Parents of Murdered Children. They have a little blurb about her unsolved case. And it indicates that she was found at the side of Muskrat Road near Shoshone, Wyoming, by county workers who were removing ice, like blocks of ice. And the road was rarely traveled except for oil field workers and county workers. And then it kind of summarizes the rest of what you said, and it adds that she appeared to have been dead for 3 days. Did
Interesting. So when they find her on March 1st, she hasn't been dead the whole time?
I don't know. That's what it says here. Now, again, this is somebody putting together information in sort of a database. I am not of the opinion that a lot of killers, even if they're not serial killers, even if they're just like a one-hit predatory killer, I don't know that they keep their victim alive.
Yeah, that's something we go back and forth on.
Now, if it was never the prerogative to kill her, of course, she had places to be, right?
Yeah.
She wasn't going to be with somebody like for an extended period of time. She was trying to get a ride, right?
Right.
And so I don't feel like predators and killers keep their victim alive because it's against human nature to hold somebody captive, feed them, and do whatever you're going to do to them with your sick killer brain and form that like sick twisted bond and then kill them. Like that's not typically what happens because it's overwhelming for somebody that's already pretty messed up mentally, right?
Right.
And so typically I would say there's a period of time. It's not going to be 13 days or something like that. Because she was last seen the 17th, and so I don't know if it was a leap year, but like it would be 12 days until February 29th, and this is March 1st she's found. So that's about 13 days. I don't think somebody held her for 10 days. It's possible, but it just seems but I also think that the reason I bring all that up is like that's a direct shot of who you would want to consider. Like who is the person doing it? If they held her for that long, they might not have been planning to kill her.
Yeah.
There have been some very strange, warped cases that at least present themselves as these weird, like, sex slave type cases where that's the prerogative. That, granted, 70s and 80s, right? I mean, a long time ago. But, it could be something like that. I feel like her case is one of the reasons Janelle Johnson is representative of why, hitchhiking was outlawed. And my entire life, I've heard how dangerous it is.
Well, so it doesn't get less interesting with the second victim. Do you want me to move on to her?
Sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to put these in context. So this next case is considered to be the second victim, but there's passage of time here. It's interesting for a number of reasons. It is a case that, like we've mentioned in passing before, but this is the Little Miss murder. It is included in the Great Basin Killings. So this is the name given to the murder case of Lisa Marie Kimmel. She's a young woman who disappears in 1988, and she's traveling, again, Denver, Colorado, over to her family's home in Billings, Montana. Her case is called the Little Miss Murder because her vehicle, which is a Honda CRX, this little small car at the time, it had the distinctive personalized license plate reading LILMISS, so Little Miss. This was a fact that was seized on by the press, and the law enforcement pushed it because they felt like that personalized license plate might lead to her being recovered. So let's talk about Lisa Marie Kimmel for just a second. She was born July 18th, 1969 in Tennessee. She was the oldest of three daughters, and she ends up being raised mostly in Billings, Montana. She graduates there from high school in 1987, and she had a job managing an Arby's restaurant over in Aurora, Colorado, near Denver. Her mom, Sheila, was a regional manager of the restaurant chain. And the two of them would commute between Billings and Denver every week. During the week, Lisa and her mom were living in an apartment complex in Denver, but they each had their own separate apartment. They would return regularly to Billings, where Dad, who's named Ronald, and the other Kimmel children, so Lisa's younger sisters, lived. On March 25th of 1988, Lisa leaves from Denver, heading to her parents' home in Billings. Her mom, Sheila, had departed from Denver, but took a flight the day before because she had a ski trip that she was scheduled to go on. While she's en route to Billings, Lisa had planned to stop in Cody, Wyoming, and she was going to pick up her boyfriend, who was named Ed. According to the Wyoming Highway Patrol, Lisa gets stopped for speeding at 9:06 p.m. in Douglas, Wyoming, which is just outside of Casper. So she's attempting to pay her ticket there, and she's followed to an ATM by the officer, but she can't use her debit card in the machine there. So the officer and Lisa make a deal that she's going to mail a check to the police department to pay the fine once she gets back to her parents' home in Billings.
So is that normal?
Not super normal, but sometimes with out-of-towners, that can be a thing where they jail you. It depends on, like we're dealing with the 80s traffic laws. It depends on how fast she was going and if it was like a reckless or something.
Right. And so I immediately, my ears perk up when I hear like a police officer is demanding you pay them money.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's all kinds of bad stuff there. I believe there's a recording of this interaction. I don't know that she was speeding. I think her tag was expired.
It could have been that too. Yeah, okay.
But I think there's a recording because she's clueless on the record as far as like why she's being stopped or whatever. And, you know, obviously this does not put the patrol officer in a great light.
No, it would not.
A little bit later, she disappears, right?
Yeah, there have been suspicious interactions like that over the years that, like, the police do turn out to be involved. So there's a reason to, dig into that.
Well, right, because if he was the last person who saw her, it's suspect, right? Well, it turns out that that's not really the case, right?
Right. They definitely investigate that angle because they come up with another sighting of her. And
right. And so they confirmed that, that wasn't the last sighting of her. I just was wondering, I don't know how common it would have been for an officer to demand a ticket to be paid on the spot. I thought it was weird. I have heard the audio. It didn't seem as weird listening to the interaction.
Right.
So whatever. But I was just curious if you had any idea.
No, I didn't have any idea on that. I did see, okay, so this is the last confirmed sighting. And by confirmed sighting, she has to show the officer her ID. But then there is an unconfirmed sighting of her at 10 p.m. that night inside a Casper, Wyoming grocery store that times up perfectly with her having been stopped in Douglas and then made her way to Casper. So investigators looked at the officer to try and figure out if he had anything to do with it. And they ultimately conclude that he doesn't. So the following day, March 26, Lisa doesn't arrive. Her boyfriend, Ed, he actually calls the Kimmel home in Billings, Montana, and he says, hey, Lisa never stopped to pick me up. And they file a missing persons report that day. 8 days after her disappearance, so April the 2nd, Lisa's body is found floating in the North Platte River near Casper, Wyoming by a local fisherman. Then keep in mind, like, what I'm giving you is like what's been reported. According to sources, an autopsy determined that she had been bound, beaten, and raped for at least 6 days. Evidence showed that she was then taken to what's known as the Old Government Bridge, where she was hit on the head with a blunt object, stabbed at least 6 times in the chest and abdomen, and then thrown into the river. The autopsy showed that the head wound was so serious, It would have killed her in a matter of minutes, even if she had not been stabbed. There's a lot to unpack there, and like I see these sources that just kind of glance over that part. Being held for 6 days is a very rare thing.
It really is. And so I wonder if that's what links. So my initial thought was, why is Janelle Johnson and Lisa Marie Kemmel, why are they linked? And obviously it's geographic location, right?
Yeah, it's and the travel path of Denver to Colorado through the Great Basin. That's what does it.
Right. And so obviously with Janelle Johnson, she's hitchhiking. Lisa Marie Kemmel is missing with her car, and then she's found and her car isn't found, right?
Right.
And so that's very different, right? That's a very different situation because hitchhikers are going to be vulnerable, and it leads us. It leads us to wonder. Okay, so how did this girl in her own vehicle, who had thwarted, a stop by police earlier, like how does it come to be that she is, assaulted and thrown off a bridge, and her car disappears for a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about how her case wraps up? Or you want to talk about the other victims here?
I was just making a comparison. We can do whatever you want.
Her case is one of the most interesting cases to me. It shows up on Unsolved Mysteries. It's been on Cold Case Files multiple times. Everybody has focused on this car, right?
Yes.
The
That's a big
car,
deal.
yeah, the car is one of those things that like eventually it should be recovered in some way. It is a small car.
I've spoken at length about people missing in automobiles, right?
Yeah.
And part of my thinking with regard to that stems from this case.
Yeah, this is okay. In the early onset of DNA evidence being used for cold cases, in fact, in the summer of 2002, investigators who were digging into this case, they come across the rape kit from Lisa Kimmel's case. They develop a DNA profile from evidence in this kit. They send it through CODIS, and they get a match. Their match is with a 57-year-old man out of Monetta, Wyoming, named Dale Wayne Eaton. He's talked about a lot, but I don't think people truly understand what kind of guy he is. At the time that he gets this match, he's in Littleton, Colorado, serving time in Inglewood Federal Prison for an unrelated weapons charge. His DNA had been placed in the CODIS database in 1997 after he was arrested on a separate charge. He had stopped to offer assistance to a family whose car had broken down, and then he kidnapped the family at gunpoint. After he gets arrested for this kidnapping, he escapes, but he's recaptured in Shoshone National Forest. At that time, he possessed a weapon which elevated his crime, being in a national forest, to a federal level. So he's got two parts of the nexus there. One, firearms charges can frequently elevate you to a federal level. Being on national park land or forest land can elevate you to a federal level. He then is incarcerated in federal prison. He is required to submit a DNA sample at the time of that sentence. When investigators get to digging into Dale Wayne Eaton, one of his next door neighbors report to investigators that on his property in Monetta, Wyoming, which is about 75 miles away from Casper, they had seen him digging a very large hole. So in the summer of 2002, the site is identified and investigators excavate this site. Guess what's in the hole?
The car.
The car. Lisa Kimmel's Honda CRX, still bearing her license plate, Little Miss, is in a hole on Dale Wayne Eaton's property.
I remember when that happened.
It's wild. That is like one of the strangest things I've ever heard of. And when it happened, I was like, he buried the whole car. I mean, it's a small car, but still.
Right. And so, okay, 2002, it was big news, right?
Yes, very big
it was
news.
a big deal. And obviously that was a while ago, and it wasn't like I had all the, I hadn't done all the research I've done at this point, and life was a lot different back then, right? This would have been on like World News Tonight, right?
Yep.
There maybe a little bit on the internet, but so that car had to go somewhere, right?
Yep.
And that had been one of the biggest mysteries, and it was different because her body was found.
Yes.
It's interesting to me that there was this separation. He took the time to bury the car, and I wondered why he didn't bury her with the car.
That's a good question. My guess is, I actually don't have a guess to that.
Well, if you think about it, if he had buried her with the car, he probably never would have been caught.
Yeah, there's no DNA profile at that point.
Right, except he would go on to commit more crimes. It's interesting to me, though. I would like to know what the thinking was. It makes me think that he wasn't necessarily going to kill her, but then after he killed her, he realized he needed to get rid of her car. But, I don't want to give potential predator serial killers any ideas, but if he had buried her in the car, he never would have been connected
by DNA. Yeah.
And the neighbor never would have said, hey, he was digging a big hole. Because we're talking about 14 years later, and it just so happened the neighbor recalled, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I guess if he had, perhaps if he had done the family kidnapping and was in prison, perhaps they would have talked and found it anyway.
Maybe, yeah.
But I don't know. But there was a connection between her and him through the DNA profile. But to me, so something had to have happened there that broke that situation up. I think it's because he killed her and then he was like, oh yeah, I've got this car. I need to do something with it. But I don't know.
Well, they find the car. He's subsequently charged with 8 crimes in connection to Lisa Kimmel's case. He gets a first-degree premeditated murder charge, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated robbery, first-degree sexual assault, and second-degree sexual assault. This is one of those cases that has a jailhouse snitch whose story actually makes a lot of sense. A guy named Joseph Francis Dax. He ends up testifying that Delween Eaton had confessed to him. According to this story, whether you believe it or not, it's up to you, Lisa Kimmel had offered to give Delween Eaton a ride, and Delween Eaton accepted. But he made sexual advances during the ride, and Lisa did not like that. She pulled over, and she asked him to get out of her car. Somehow, her saying get out of the car then escalated to kidnapping, rape, and murder. And apparently for multiple days. That could be the difference between the burial of the car and her being dumped in the river. The fact that he held on to her for multiple days. So ultimately he's found guilty. March 20th, 2004, he's sentenced to death. He appeals this conviction and he loses. He was scheduled to be put to death in February 2010. He sought and received a stay of execution in December 2009. That stay of execution was overturned in 2014. The state was originally planning to seek a reinstatement of his death sentence. They end up dropping the request in September 2021. And prior to all of this happening, when he gets removed from death row, Delween Eaton was the only inmate on Wyoming's death row. Now, he loses his property to the Kimmel family during a wrongful death lawsuit. And on July 18th, 2005, which would have been Lisa Kimmel's 36th birthday, the buildings on the property were burned to the ground. So we'll pick up next time with the next series of crimes that are related to the Great Basin murders.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.
This is just a reminder that we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network, and I put a link in the show notes if you guys want to check it out for your own podcasting needs. I've always enjoyed using Zencastr. Their quality is great, and we were able to join their creator network at kind of a key time in their history. I have enjoyed it. I've considered a lot of other places to record and a lot of other ways to put together and host and distribute our podcast. But I've stuck with Zencastr the longest. We've been with them for hundreds of episodes now. And I'm putting a link in the show notes where you can check out what they have to offer and see if it's something you would want to use.